I want to welcome you. I'm Ted Fetter, and I chair the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of New Jersey Task Force on Immigration. And the Legislative Ministry of New Jersey, along with our congregation, the UU Congregation of Princeton Social Justice Committee, are co-sponsoring this workshop. The purpose of the workshop is to understand better the current immigration system in the United States and the potential for reform that seems alive and vibrant now in Washington. Certainly, immigration reform is more likely now than it has been since the last effort, 2006 or 7, and more likely than it was then, I think, because there seems to be political forces that are aligning in favor of some kind of legislative action. We're going to go through and spend time on what the immigration reform proposal introduced this past week in the Senate would do and what it would look like, and that's the handout that you all already have. But we're also going to try to understand better what the current system is and how it works, how it doesn't work in many, many different ways, and what the real impact of the current system is on the people who come under its impact, who are affected by it. And that's why I'm so pleased to introduce the people who are to my left and your right. And I would be very, very pleased to introduce them now, do a little brief mention of how we're going to run the program, and then ask them to tell their stories. Next to me is Giancarlo Tello. He has been in the United States for the last 17 years, came as a child. He is, in fact, undocumented, and he has been working toward his undergraduate degree, now paying out-of-state tuition at Rutgers. He's also the campaign manager for the program, because he's paying out-of-state tuition at Rutgers, to get in-state tuition for young people who came to this country by their parents at some time in their childhood. And he's very much involved with the New Jersey DREAM Act Coalition. So Giancarlo, who is substituting today for Marisol Conde Hernandez, who has to work today at her job because she couldn't get the day off, and if she doesn't do her job, she can't do anything. So Marisol said with great regret that she couldn't be here, but Marisol recruited Giancarlo to have us tell his story. Welcome, Giancarlo.
Thank you.
To Giancarlo's left is Alberto Gendete, and I'll let Lou Kimmel introduce Alberto. Alberto is a member of New Labor. To his left and my left and your right, at the end of the table is Lou Kimmel. Lou Kimmel is a co-founder of New Labor, workers' rights organization that works out of New Brunswick. He is the director of operations and membership for New Labor. He's the field organizer and the education coordinator. He's one of the several people who keep going, working year after year with workers' rights, with workers in central New Jersey, and assuring that they have the best arrangements that they have. And Lou, we're very, very glad that you're able to be here this afternoon. Thank you, Lou. Lou, would you like to introduce Alberto a little bit more than I just did?
Sure. Do it briefly, but I think he could probably do it himself as well. This is Alberto Gendete. He's been a member of New Labor for about 5 years. He works at a temp agency, or through a temp agency in New Brunswick at a place called Medicia. So no sé si quiere decir algo más.
Voy a hablar en español, me va a introducir. ¿Qué?
Just going to do it in Spanish.
Sorry por no poder hablar el inglés todavía.
Sorry for not being able to speak English right now at this moment.
Bueno, mi nombre es Alberto Jandete. Yo soy miembro de New Labor y soy de México.
Right. I'm Alberto Hamdete. I'm a member of New Labor, and I come from Mexico.
Yo soy uno de los 11 inmigrantes que estamos en este país
I'm one of the 11 million immigrants in this country,
y yo estoy luchando por tener un estatus en este país,
and I'm fighting to have a status here in this country.
porque para mí es muy importante tener el estatus para poder salir a ver a mi familia, que ya tengo tiempo que no la veo,
It's very important for me to have status to be able to visit my family I haven't seen in a long time.
y también luchar por los derechos de los trabajadores, que somos muy abusados en las áreas laborales.
And also fight for the rights of workers who are very abused in the workplace.
Somos abusados que no pagan salarios,
And there's occasions where we're not paid our wages,
las agencias nos abusan mucho
and the temp agencies abuse us a lot.
y es más o menos lo que es mi vida, pero yo con el tiempo les hablaré más de lo que yo soy.
Okay, that's basically my life, but we'll talk a little bit more later about what I do.
I want to refer very briefly to the handout that I hope each of you has or can get. This is a summary of the 844-page Senate bill that was introduced this week on comprehensive immigration reform. It has some strengths, it has some weaknesses. It's hugely complex, and many parts of it are interrelated. Later on, I'm going to try to go through each of the major elements that are outlined on this sheet. But what I want to say now, before we hear from the main presenters, our guests here, is that some of the elements in this bill seem to me to have a moral dimension. These are the elements that affect people's lives and that provide justice or injustice in the ways that our country deals with human beings who are already here or need to come here in order to earn their living. And it's those elements that we want to emphasize and talk about, since this is a workshop for people of faith and for people with an economic impact, yes, but more than that, a moral and humanitarian impact or interest. So we're going to spend most of the time on those aspects of this piece of the legislation. But inextricably linked with those pieces are other elements of the bill that, in many cases, they're directly connected, and in other cases, they're part of the compromise that produces this bill. So we're going to hear about two major pieces, and as Giancarlo and then Lou and Alberto talk about these two elements of their lives and their stories. But then we'll go back and we'll work through the elements of this proposal as we can, as we have time, in order to try to understand the interactions of the whole immigration issue and this potential compromise that may be possible to be enacted in Congress. So you can look at them. What we're going to start with is the path to citizenship, and especially for the younger people, for the so-called dreamers, people who came to this country by their parents. There's a federal government acronym, DACA, Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals, DACA. You can hear people talk about the DACAs. I like to call them the dreamers, the people who have been brought to this country by their parents and for whom this is the only home that they really know. And after we listen to Giancarlo, have a chance to question and answer on Giancarlo's situation, then we'll go to Lou and Alberto to talk about workers' rights. With that said, I am very, very pleased to introduce now for his presentation Giancarlo Tello. Giancarlo, thank you for being here.
All right, so my name is Giancarlo Tello. I was born in 1990 in Peru. When I was 6 years old in 1996, my parents decided that for me to have a better chance at an education or a career or an economic future, Peru wasn't the best place for me. It was still a third world developing country. There's a lot of corruption and the school system wasn't that great. So at that point they decided to come to America. I didn't understand what that meant. They told me we were going to Disney World. So I was 6 years old, we got on a plane, did a layover in Florida, and they came in straight to Newark Airport into New Jersey. So I was 6 years old, I didn't know any English. I registered right away for first grade, because I was at that age. I went into first grade. First couple months, I knew no English. I stayed in the hallway crying. But thankfully, I was very young, so I was able to adapt pretty quickly. I picked up the language fairly quickly. Eventually, I started reading books right away. I was just looking through my report cards the other day, and in second grade, I was already reading books, which I felt pretty happy about. So yeah, I went into first grade, second grade, third grade, elementary school, middle school, high school. In high school, when I got to my sophomore year, we have this class called driver's ed. I don't know if people here took it. Yeah, everybody took it, right? Yeah. So driver's ed, where you do your written test in class, whether you can get your learner's permit or not, and then whether you can practice start driving or not. So thankfully, I was one of the few people in my class who actually passed it. So I passed my written test. I was happy. I was excited. I got that little card. My teacher said, take this to the DMV, get it signed, and then you can start practicing to drive. And I was excited. So I took that card. I brought it home, and I asked my mom, can we go to the DMV and get this signed? My mom said no. I said, why not? She said, because you don't have a green card. You don't have a social security card. You're undocumented. Or what we hear in the media a lot, illegal. That's when I first found out about my status. I was 16 years old in high school. Every year up to that point, and still to this day, I said my Pledge of Allegiance. I believed I was American. I was living my American dream. And to extent, I still believe I am American. I consider myself an American. That's a whole nother topic, what you would define as American. But back to the story. I didn't understand what that meant. I was still very young. Mom said, you know, this thing's gonna get fixed, something's gonna happen, we have something going for you in the process. There's a petition out there for you, it'll work out. I'm like, okay. Still 16, sophomore, you don't need to drive when you're a sophomore in high school. So junior and senior year came, the SATs, college applications. I got those college applications. And on it was these 9 square boxes, social security number. I took it to my mom, I said, Mom, what do I put here? My mom said nothing. You don't have a social security card. I asked my mom, Mom, can I go to college? Mom said, I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, I was confused. Here I am with all my peers and colleagues. Thankfully, I was doing pretty good in school, so the group of friends I hung out with, they were all like, oh, look, I'm going to MIT, I'm going down here to Princeton, I'm going here. And I didn't know what to do. My friends were already driving around. What could I say? I was like, oh no, my mom won't let me get my license. First thing my mom told me when she told me I was undocumented, you can't tell anyone. You can be deported. You can be sent back to Peru, a country which I don't remember, when I was 6 years old when I was brought here to America, and separated from my family. My mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles, my little sister who was born here is actually a citizen because she was born here. And at such a young age, at 16 years old, that kind of hits you. I went through a very depressed phase in my life at that point. I had believed in this story, this American dream that if you work hard, you study hard, you do all these things right, that you could go to college, you could get a career, you could get buy a home, you get married, have kids, you could live a future here. And all of a sudden I had this barrier, this wall in front of me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell anyone. To this day, I never told any of my high school teachers or counselors. None of my best friends then knew. Thankfully, through some research online and through speaking to some family members, I was able to find out that I could attend a community college. So I enrolled over in Bergen Community College. I was living in Teaneck in Bergen County at the time. That's up in North Jersey, up around in Paramus. I enrolled and I went to admissions and I got accepted and everything. I just left the social security card and thing blank. I handed it in and they're like, do you have your green card? Do you have social security? And I'm like, no, I don't have that with me right now. I don't know what to say. What do you say when you're confronted with that question? And they're like, oh, okay, when you get it, bring it back. For now, we'll charge you the international rate. I didn't go back. From that point on, I was being charged the international rate, meaning I was paying 3 times as much as any of my peers who lived in county for that tuition. That's when I decided, this is unfair. How am I supposed to afford my education? And I was undocumented. At that point, I wasn't eligible for a driver's license. I'm still not eligible for financial aid. I wasn't able to work legally. I wasn't eligible for most scholarships, no Pell Grants. How was one supposed to afford such a higher education here in these days with those restrictions? I did what I could. I was a tennis coach, still am. I did IT repair, decent with computers. I was able to fund my own way. It took me a few years, but eventually after a while I was able to graduate community college. During that phase, however, is when I found out, during that time is when I discovered something called the New Jersey Dream Act Coalition. Something with Marisol, who was going to be the original speaker, was a co-founder of. That's when I found out about something called the Dream Act. The Dream Act, which is a federal bill that was introduced in 2001, which would have helped out students such as myself in my situation, who are undocumented, who were brought when we were very young, who have no criminal background or history, who do want to just contribute to our society and do. The misconception that we don't pay taxes is entirely absurd. We have something called an ITIN assigned by the IRS that you get regardless of immigration status, where you do pay your taxes. I pay my taxes all the time. 2010 alone, undocumented immigrants contributed over $11 billion in tax revenue into the federal government. So that's when I learned about the Dream Act, New Jersey Dream Act Coalition. I got involved. I decided that I can't hide in the shadows no longer. I decided if I want to have a future, I have to fight for it. I know it sounds really silly, but some of my heroes at that time and still are, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., they had a lot of obstacles ahead of them, but they didn't let that stop them. I couldn't let that stop me. And I got involved. And I did a lot of lobbying. I did a lot of events such as this. And then back in 2010, the Dream Act was put up for a vote. We passed it in the House of Representatives. Then we came up to the Senate. We knew Obama would sign it if the Senate passed it. We knew we had the majority in the Senate, but at the time, and still to this day, Republicans kept using something called a filibuster. So instead of just needing a simple majority, 51 out of 100 to pass a bill, we needed a 60 to break filibuster to even vote on the bill. They were blocking the vote of even the bill. So that day was one of the most biggest days in my life also in terms of organizing. I went with a few of my friends here in New Jersey that I met from New Jersey Dream Act Coalition, and I met with hundreds of dreamers from around the nation. California, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and we all wore our caps and gowns. We wanted to symbolize to them, we're just students. We just want to pursue our education. We're not trying to ask for a handout. We went there and we all held hands. We were in something called the National Gallery. So that's like, think of the Senate building as like a stadium. Down there are all the senators. You see your John McCain, Harry Reid, and up there watching them were all of us. At that time, we were also with our Don't Ask, Don't Tell brothers and sisters who their piece of legislation was up for vote as well. And we were all holding hands. And we heard them counting. We heard them voting on our lives. These people who don't know us, who don't know our stories, voting yes or no on our future. People who don't understand what we're going through. And in the end, we got 55 votes. We got a majority. But because of the Republicans' filibuster, it ended up not passing. That was one of the hardest days in my life, in our community's lives. But that was also one of the most beautiful. Because at that point in time, we are a community. That we're together. That if we stay together, that if we fight together for our community, it's not just for ourselves. It's for every single one of us. It's for the people who are coming after us and who are before us. It's so nobody else can get that depressed feeling that we had, that we still have at this point. So we can make sure we're not afraid every day of ourselves or our parents being deported and taken from our family. Our parents can't get driver's licenses. They're risking their lives every day just to make an income, just to pay the mortgage, just to get the groceries, just to put food on the table. And we decided we're not going to put up with that anymore. And we told Obama, this didn't pass, but you can still stop deportations for dreamers. And he didn't want to do it. He said he can't. We brought up the law, we brought lawyers, we're like, yes, you can. He said, no, you can't. You know what? We didn't accept that. In August of last year, a couple of dreamers risked everything. They decided to go and occupy Obama's campaign office. They said, Obama, if you don't stop tearing apart our communities, we're going to occupy your office and you have to deport us. And we'll see how that looks in your elections. That was election year. You know what happened? 2 weeks later, he announced Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that he mentioned earlier, which was something similar to the DREAM Act, but not exactly, that allowed dreamers, people like myself who came here when we were very young, to have access to something called deferred action, meaning we were quote-unquote non-deportable for 2 years, and also allow us to apply to get a work permit, which I obtained. That work permit then allows you to get a social security card, which I also obtained. And with that, in New Jersey, thanks to our 6-point system, as I mentioned to someone earlier, I was finally able to get a license. So 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was finally able to go to the DMV and go get my license and drive. 7 years it took me, but I didn't give up, and our community is not giving up. And that's what we got. And at that point, that's when our community, we had a national congress, we had over 600 undocumented youth joined together in Kansas City. We decided this is not enough, and it's not enough just to fight for ourselves in the DREAM Act. That's when we decided from now on, we're pushing for immigration reform, for comprehensive immigration reform. We want to include our parents, our aunts, our uncles, people who came here just because they want a better life, like many of your ancestors did. Like even our forefathers did here in America, the founders, what they did, they came here for a better life. And that's what we decided to do, and that's what we're pushing for now. And that's why we have such a big push, and why this debate is so lively now in Congress and in the national spotlight. And that's what we're going to keep fighting for, and that's what I keep fighting for, day in and day out. Thank you.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Thank you very much. Very, very moving story. Let me invite you to ask questions, and I'm going to maybe take the first question, and we're going to do this for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're going to hear from Lou and Alberto. But for a few minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, we can ask questions of Giancarlo. Giancarlo, tell us about the status of your parents over the course of these 15 or 16 or 17 years that they've been in the U.S. Where have they worked? What have they been able to do in this country?
So my parents are still both currently undocumented. My mom, thankfully enough, because of my grandpa, has a petition in her name that's going through, but it's still in the process because of how broken and backlogged our immigration system is. So she's still out of status while that petition is going through, even though they know it'll be accepted, but they're still backlogged. They're still processing requests from like 2001. It's 2013 right now. As an addendum to that, so there is a petition from my mom through my grandfather, who recently became a naturalized citizen. But because of how backlogged and broken our immigration system is, that petition still has yet to go into effect to give her any status. As an addendum to that as well, that petition would originally have covered me. But because of how long it takes for them to process these requests, I quote unquote aged out. I turned over 21. Meaning that if it goes through and if it fixes my mom's status, it will no longer cover me, leaving me without status, without any hope besides federal law being changed. My dad, unfortunately, still has no status, and he doesn't have a petition to his name. They both work with licenses from one from Maryland and one from Washington, which are states which are more lenient in terms of giving licenses. And that's driver's licenses, yes. And that's the thing you have to do. That's the thing you have to take risks in order to provide for your family and work. So they work random odd jobs, what they can, in order to help provide for myself and my little sister, who's 11 years old.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know, is there a difference between Hispanic immigrants and how the documentation works, and others, because my in-laws have in-laws that are Pakistani, and they got documented already within like 5 years. So I don't know what the process. Do you know?
Okay, so that was a very good question, and it also emphasizes just how weird our immigration system is. So what they do is they give out a certain amount of visas based on a certain amount of countries. So it does depend on where you're applying for and what kind of visa you're applying for as well, whether you're applying for like a tourist visa, a work visa. There are a lot of others, H-1B visa, W-2 visas. It's a very complicated system, but they are allotted different amounts by different countries. Say if right now, if you're a citizen and you petition for, say, a Mexican relative, it'll take you over 100 years for that to be approved and for that person to be allowed to come in legally. But say if you apply for something like Pakistan or another country which doesn't have as much volume coming in, doesn't have as many people coming in, then the process is naturally quicker because there are a lot less people trying to fight for that same slot.
Your family's been here for 10 years.
17.
17 years. Okay. And during that time, I take it everybody in the family had to work as hard as they could to not have any interaction with the law, because that would have exposed every one of you to deportation. And I take it that any sort of interaction with the law could lead to this, a traffic stop, something very simple.
That is correct. When you're undocumented, naturally you have to be very wary and you never want to go into contact with law enforcement, especially recently. So what the Obama administration recently did was implement and make mandatory something called secure communities, which you might have heard of, which is a bit of a misnomer, meaning that a bit of a misnomer because it makes our communities live a lot more in fear and be more afraid of cooperating with local law enforcement. Because say if you're stopped for, say, a normal traffic violation or anything else, you maybe like went through a stop sign or you're driving without a license, which a lot of us are forced to do at one point or another. My colleague Marisol, who was supposed to be here originally before me, she drives without a license, but that's because you have to drive here in New Jersey in order to be able to work and live. So yeah, you have to. And Secure Communities is a program that local law enforcement, whenever they take your fingerprints or they run you through the system, they would automatically be checked against Immigration and Customs Enforcement database. And so they would check your status. And if you are listed there that you're out of status, it will automatically lock you up and detain you and wait for ICE to come and get you. And then at one point they'll transfer you to the detention center, which might be privatized or not, in which you don't have your Miranda rights. You don't have right to an attorney. You could be deported at any time. There's actually a great documentary out on it. PBS, it's called Frontlines. It covers the detention immigration system here really well because we go through something called mandatory detention, and there you're deprived of rights. You could hear stories of the women there being literally raped and threatened with deportation if they dare speak out. And they don't want to because if they get deported, they're separated from their families, their children. There are millions and millions of families here who have mixed status. Some are citizens, the children of their parents might be, and then the children of the other parents might be out of status. So that's the kind of stuff that's going on right now, and that's why you really want to avoid local law enforcement, or any law enforcement for that matter. And yes, that is why we try our hardest to stay below the radar.
And let me just remind you of one or two of the consequences of that. If you're a woman faced with domestic violence, you're very unlikely to file a domestic violence complaint. If you're the victim of a robbery or some other crime, you're very unlikely to report that crime. It is a quandary, it's a struggle, it's a mystery how these folks have survived as well as they have. Other questions?
I just want to follow up with what you said about specifically domestic violence, because I had been given training and support for the organization Safe in Hunterdon, and we were told there that the victims of domestic violence are protected from being reported to the INS if they seek help in this regard. And also I know of, through this, of a man who was accused of domestic violence situations and he is not documented, and he has been brought before the courts in connection with this, and yet he has not been, there's been nothing done with regard to deportation or any other areas. That seems to be a separate, protected area for both sides. So if you could comment on that.
I can. Let me ask Giancarlo first.
Yes, so those are great points, especially the first one. What you mentioned was something called the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which was recently finally reenacted by Congress. So what that does is if you are domestically abused by only a citizen spouse, you might be eligible for a visa. Then you'll be safe from deportation or safe from other consequences. But that's only if it's from a citizen spouse or somebody you're married with. Otherwise, it doesn't apply to you. Regarding the second part, immigration system's complicated. And when it comes down to it, the detention centers work like a hotel. The more people they keep in, the more money they make. They want those things to be filled. Why do you think Obama administration now has a quota of 400,000 people every year? The Obama administration set a goal of deporting 400,000 people every year. He deported more people in his first term than George W. Bush did in 2 terms. So, and honestly, the immigration system is very complicated. There are other things they could file for, so they could wait. And honestly, court hearings and such, since the immigration system is so backlogged, get delayed for a while. So some people don't even get bail, so they're kept in court while the court case is ongoing, so they don't get deported right away. It's a very complicated system. I honestly can't say that I'm 100% that I know. I only know probably like 5% of immigration. It's a very complicated thing, and it's only going to get more complicated moving forward.
Let me just add a little bit to what Giancarlo said. I agree with you that once there is a matter in at least the New Jersey courts for domestic violence, that's the one I know very, very well, no one asks about the status of the people involved in domestic violence. It is part of the training that you're not going to ask about the status. But, and it's a hugely important but, there's no effective way to make sure that the victim of domestic violence knows that she won't be asked about her status. She's going to be initially very reluctant to come forward, not knowing that she won't be asked, or at least unsure that she won't be asked. On your second element about the men maybe not being prosecuted for deportation, it's a hit and miss system. What Giancarlo said about people being identified and prosecuted and deported without counsel is true. The Obama administration has been more aggressive about deportations than the Bush administration ever was. That's true too, but it's still hit and miss. It's local people taking files of cases and picking the ones to go send a warrant out for, or the one who gets arrested for something else or cited for a third thing. And it's just, they are liable to be deported, but that doesn't mean they're going to be deported. It's just very random in its application. Let me see if there's one more question maybe, and if not, then we'll go on. But if there's one more question, I invite it. Okay. Let me again introduce Lou Kimmel, co-founder of New Labor, and invite you, Lou, to describe the organization and the work it does and the workers' rights issues, along with Alberto Hendete's assistance.
Sure. First, I'd just like to thank the Unitarian Universalist Church for having us here today. And kind of to echo what Giancarlo was saying, that this is a fight that's going to keep on going, and you really got to work together, organize, because we're all in this together. And that's basically what we've been doing since 2003 in terms of immigration reform. Sorry. That is what we have been doing since 2003 in terms of fighting for comprehensive immigration reform here in New Jersey, at protests with legislators and going to DC, et cetera. So, we're not stopping. I think he has it on his shirt in Spanish, ya es hora, which means it's time, right? Now is the time, right? If we don't do it, who will? So there's a call to action. I'm sure everyone here would agree that it's not just us in front of the room that will make it happen, but you as well, right? So to back up, I guess, I'll just give a brief overview of New Labor, what the organization is, and then we'll show some pictures because I think that will help, I guess, better visualize what it's like to work in a low-wage work industry. And Alberto Hendete can talk about his experience working as a temp, as well as kind of explain how the whole system works itself. Are you familiar with New Labor or no?
Let's say no.
Okay. All right. New Labor is a membership-based organization of mostly low-wage Latino immigrant workers that educates, organizes, and fights for better conditions of work. So it's kind of like a community union. It's a worker center, so we do things that a union does, except that we're for the community, so it's not geared to one specific industry or one specific workplace. So if we can back up, the idea of New Labor started in the mid-90s when work here was beginning to change. And that traditional work arrangement, you might be able to work your way up from a janitorial position up into management or something like that. That was much more impossible, right? Work was becoming more mobile. People were going back and forth from job to job looking for better conditions or better pay. Traditionally, labor unions would be a representative to give a voice in the workplace and improve conditions of work. However, traditional unions would be based around traditional job relationship in one particular work site or one particular craft or industry. In around 1999-2000 in New Brunswick is where I got roped into helping form New Labor. There were a bunch of temp agencies that were springing up. They would send people out to work in factories and warehouses, light industrial complexes at Exit 8A on the Turnpike, Exit 10 on the Turnpike, and the like, right? So I myself started working as a temp to try and figure out what was going on. I was getting sent out, and all the conditions that we will talk about now were happening then too, right? The difference is now that there is an organization behind it to fight those conditions, right? So basically, at that moment, what people wanted was not necessarily fighting for their rights, but learning English, right? And so people came to me saying, where can I learn English with you, right? So we basically started an ESL program out of our office in New Brunswick with just one person. I invited about 30. And one of the slogans at New Labor is little by little, poco a poco. So that person invited someone else, and little by little, word of mouth spread. So we had more people coming in, so much that we had to move to our current location on Bayard Street. It was a little bit bigger. Our classes are a little bit different, and they've always been different. It was never a traditional ESL class, and it never will be. It's more survival skills, and the idea of the class was that there's some political element to it as well, consciousness raising, creating an affinity to the organization. So at the same time, you're creating this space that didn't exist previously, where people can comfortably talk about issues that are affecting them in their community or in the workplace, so that people see what they have in common is not just wanting to learn English, but they might have a landlord that's screwing them over. They might have an employer that's not paying them, and it's not just an isolated incident, right? So the way to confront that has always been organizing and creating a respaldo, a group that's behind you to be able to have your voice heard and make your demands met, right? So I at New Labor, he mentioned, I guess I'm the Director of Operations and Membership. So I'm up here right now. That doesn't mean I'm always up in the front of the room. A lot of times I'm in the back of the room pushing people to take the initiative, right? As Giancarlo mentioned, it's hard. There's lots of obstacles out there. People have fear. There's constant worry about what could happen next. But at the same time, we do have rights. And at the same time, just knowing them isn't enough, right? Knowledge isn't always power, right? There needs to be a group behind it to be able to exercise those rights. That brings us back, I guess, to where we are now with comprehensive immigration reform. The idea in itself is good, but there's going to be several cautions, especially on the worker piece. Even though there might be some protections provided, if the conditions of labor really don't change, people will basically still be in the same boat, even though they have a status. So there is still going to be some kind of fear, in my mind. So we need to be wary of that people will still not want to rock the boat if they want to last 10 years and then last another 3 years to be able to get citizenship, which is a 13-year process. It's a really long process, okay? So I guess backing up now to what it's like to be a low-wage worker, right? We have centers in Lakewood, in New Brunswick, and Newark, so 3 different parts of New Jersey. We have 2,000 members that pay dues, so again, kind of like a union, to belong to the organization, have their voice and vote heard within the organization, and in terms of what campaigns we will be involved with. So there are kind of different labor sectors. Low-wage work covers anything from restaurants, landscaping, construction, to hotel and housekeeping, domestic work, light labor, temporary agency, warehouse, you name it. Low wage here basically is anything below $12 per hour. Most people are making $7.25, the minimum, if that, to about $10 an hour as a max. There's usually a ceiling that you cannot break in low wage industries despite any years of experience that you may have or any particular skills you may have. They're not always recognized. And also another thing to add, the immigrants that come here have lots of degrees and expertise in their home countries, but they're not recognized here, right? So you lose all your social capital once you're here. And in these low-wage industries, a lot of times the employers just see you as a body, you're not a person, right? So they just need someone to do the job, right? No questions asked. So through the centers, I guess we can go over Lakewood, Newark, and New Brunswick. Lakewood is a very unique place. A lot of the people in that labor market work as domestic workers, and that's not just cleaning. They work in multiple houses throughout the course of a week, cleaning them, washing and cleaning cars, ironing, sewing, babysitting, in that arrangement there, as well as construction. In Newark, it's a more residential construction market. In addition to some factories, we'll talk about some of the abuses that happen there in residential construction. In New Brunswick, again, for the most part, a lot of people there work in temp agencies and or warehouses or through agencies at warehouses. So here's just a document that I put together based on 60 surveys of domestic workers in Lakewood. It kind of shows an overview. There's hundreds of people that work as domestic workers in Lakewood. Most of them are Latina, as well as some Polish and Russian immigrants too. Again, most are cleaning multiple houses, so a lot of the traditional benefits, again, that were created before these new kinds of work arrangements came about, such as overtime, would be hard to obtain because you need to be working for 40 hours with one employer to be eligible for overtime. People here are cleaning multiple houses, so they can be working 45, 50 hours, but they will not be getting the overtime here. At the same time, there's various abuses or irregularities that come up in this particular job market. A lot of people don't have access to lunch or breaks, and they can't bring in their own food. The population there, it's like one of the largest Orthodox Jewish populations, so people are cleaning houses of Orthodox homeowners or renters. So there's certain customs that create that situation. No one gets sick days or holidays. People are not taught how to use the cleaning products. People are yelled at, disrespected, accused of stealing, etc. There's one particular case I'll highlight where we had a woman come to us distraught. She had finished her third house cleaning for the day, and the homeowner from the first house came over, basically started yelling at her, holding up an empty envelope. She didn't understand English too well, but could make it out that he was saying, "Where's my money?" essentially. And she, in her broken English, answered, "I don't have your money. I don't know what you're talking about," essentially. So this man and the woman of this house, this was in a basement, they kind of enclosed her, kept her down there, and searched her all over, right? Every part of her body, pulled down her blouse to make sure there's no money there. And we went to the police with this, and the funny thing is the homeowner and the other man that came over did not deny this, but they just denied that they kept her there against her will, right? So for every story like that that's told, there's many more that are not told, right? Another case, a woman was cleaning a house, and there was a kid that basically, a teenager basically grabbed her butt, right? And one of the inconsistencies of Lakewood is that there's a few intermediaries that control the labor market, so they're not regulated with the state, but yet people pay $200, $300 to get that job placement. And in this case, the woman Sylvia had done that, and she went to complain to the intermediary who accused Sylvia of lying, and no more work for her, didn't get paid for that week as well. So again, this is the kind of thing that's happening out there. So, to fight that, what the women down there wanted to do was do a march on International Domestic Workers Day. So we've begun starting to organize. Again, not something that's coming from me. So here is a picture of that. And we basically went through some of the streets of Lakewood and went to some of the intermediaries' houses so that they can shout the demands to them, right, at their place. So again, this was creating a group or a presence that had not previously been created, probably ever, in Lakewood, right? So it's been an important step for, in this case, the women to step up like that and assume leadership roles in organizing the event and carrying it out. Okay, so again, going back to Newark, Newark is a large population there of immigrants that work in residential construction. Most of our members come from the ironbound section, which is historically Portuguese and Brazilian, but it's really not that much the case anymore. There's a growing Ecuadorian and Honduran population there. And these are some of the conditions that people might come across. So I don't know, can you see that? There is a guy over here. Can you see that? No? Okay. To describe it then, basically it's on top of a scaffold. There's no protection there. It doesn't have any personal protective equipment such as helmet or fall protection, and he's leaning over the edge. So in the OSHA parlance, that's basically imminent danger. His life's at risk. And why do people do that? I mean, people will say that their life is not worth any amount of money, but it is if you need to put food on the table for in a worker's mind. So the conditions of work here are created and the work needs to get done, so contractors will justify and say, I can't do anything about it, this is what needs to be done. The scaffold has no fall protection. Again, it should be there above 10 feet. So that's some of the things that workers in Newark are coming across, and another similar one here as well. An improvised scaffold. It's not correctly ground, no fall protection again. In these cases, we've trained some of our members to be able to document what's going on there. Michelle Oshner, who's a member here of the church, works on the research side of that. And they've been trained to conduct safety audits of these work sites to see what is wrong, and at the same time to be able to take action. So they've, as a group, might do a safety audit of this site, and if they feel that there are certain violations, they will call OSHA, so that OSHA will come in immediately and make an inspection there, having had formed a relationship with them previously. Again, so that's, overcoming the fear obstacle through an organization. Okay. Lastly, I guess we can kind of focus on the New Brunswick case and what is going on there with temp agencies and warehouses. I have a few pictures that I'll put up later. I'll have Hendete talk a little bit about that, and then I'll add it to them as well. So,
Alberto, welcome.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Primero, mi nombre es Alberto.
My name's Alberto.
Y antes de hablarle un poco de trabajo de agencia que hago yo, voy a hablar un poco sobre mi vida como inmigrante en este país.
Right. So before going into talking about work through temp agencies, I would like to talk a little bit about my life as an immigrant here.
Yo tengo en este país 8 años.
I have been here for 8 years.
Yo sé que yo hice algo ilegal al cruzar ilegalmente a este país.
I know it was not legal to be crossing the border into this country the way I did.
Pero yo lo hice por que mi familia tenga una vida mejor.
So I did it so that my family could have a better life.
Y yo he llegado a este país y yo he pagado taxes
And getting to this country, I've paid taxes
desde el momento que pisé este país.
from the moment I got here.
Yo no he hecho ni un crimen, he estado limpio de mi récord.
I haven't committed any crime. I have a clean slate record.
Yo lo que me dedico es a trabajar, a mi casa,
And I've just dedicated myself to working and taking care of my home.
y hago mi deporte, que es lo que me gusta, fútbol.
I also like to play soccer.
Y he sufrido mucho porque no tengo un documento que me avale que soy legal de este país.
And have suffered a lot because I don't have that legal document that recognizes me as such in this country.
Pero yo estoy orgulloso de los Dream Act
But I'm also proud of the DREAM Act fighters
porque ellos han logrado de hace mucho tiempo que lo estén reconociendo.
because they've obtained something they've been so long fighting for and was not previously recognized.
Y han deportado a muchos estudiantes que en este país tienen mucho futuro.
Right, and students had been deported that had a bright future ahead of them.
Y yo digo que si ellos pueden, también nosotros podemos hacer la lucha para tener un estatus migratorio en este país.
And I say if they could do it, then we could too, so that we as workers could also have immigration status in this country.
Para mí ha sido algo muy feo trabajar por agencia,
For me, it's been a bad experience working through an agency.
porque solamente tengo un salario y no tengo beneficios como médico, ni días de enfermedad, nada de eso.
Basically, all I get is a wage, and you have no benefits associated with that, sick days, health care, or anything like that.
Y aquí en este país tengo que pagar la renta,
In this country, you have to pay the rent,
hay que tener para comer
to be able to eat,
y también para mandar a la familia.
and be able to send money back home.
Y pues para mí ha sido muy triste lo que ha pasado desde que he llegado a este país.
So it's been sad in that sense since I've been here.
Este país me ha dado mucho, porque yo no puedo renegar de que no, pero que este país me ha dado mucho.
So I can't negate, this country has given me a lot since I've been here, too,
Lo que en mi país yo no pude tener.
what I couldn't have in my country.
Pero también nosotros respetamos este país
And we respect this country.
y esperemos que los senadores y Obama se pongan de acuerdo para una reforma migratoria.
We hope that the senators, the President Obama, they all get together and reach an agreement on immigration reform.
Porque la primera administración de Obama, nosotros fuimos a Washington a hablar con los senadores y congresistas,
It was back in the first term of Obama, we went to talk with the congressmen, congresspeople in D.C. about immigration reform.
y no se hizo nada más. No se pudo hacer nada en esa administración.
He didn't do anything, nothing could happen then, supposedly.
Pero yo siento que esta administración ahora sí viene más fuerte para poder arreglar el estatus migratorio de los 11 millones de inmigrantes que estamos aquí.
So now I see this, at least in this term, the administration is stronger and has more capacity to be able to create an immigration status for the 11 million undocumented here.
Pero sobre todo quiero agradecerle a la organización de New Labor,
And above all, I would like to thank New Labor,
que ellos me han dado la herramienta para poder defenderme en mi área de trabajo.
and they've given me the tools to be able to defend myself in the workplace.
Yo antes tenía miedo de lo que me decían, yo hacía lo que, aunque no tuviera entrenamiento, yo lo hacía.
Before I was afraid, when they told me to do something, I would do it, even though I didn't have training to do it.
Pero desde que entré a New Labor y empecé a conocer mis derechos como trabajador,
And since coming into New Labor and beginning to know my rights as a worker,
ya no me dejo. Ahora yo pido un training, yo sé cómo son los derechos laborales en mi compañía.
so I don't let that happen anymore. Since taking training, I know what my rights are as a worker in the company.
Ahora ya no me van a pisotear como lo hacían antes.
And they can't step on me or step on us anymore.
Y bueno, lo único que puedo decir que estoy orgulloso de estar aquí y que nos estén apoyando también ustedes.
And I'm very proud to be here and like to again thank you and proud that you are here.
Como
supporting
decimos
us.
nosotros, que nos apoyan los gringos.
Saying us to the gringos that support us.
Y yo les agradezco mucho a ustedes y esperemos que esta reforma migratoria se haga para bien de toda la comunidad
I thank you all and hope this immigration reform is good for everyone in the community.
y que paren la deportación para que los niños no se queden sin sus padres.
Right? And deportation should stop so that kids are not without their parents.
Bueno, ahora voy a hablar un poco de lo que hacemos en New Brunswick.
So now I'll go back to talking about what goes on in New Brunswick.
Bueno, yo soy miembro de New Labor.
So I'm a member of New Labor.
Nosotros cada 15 días
Every 15 days,
tenemos una reunión de consejo de trabajadores.
we have a meeting. It's called the Consejo, like a worker council.
Ese consejo nos reunimos alrededor de 15 a 20 personas
So usually we'll have about 15 to 20 people at these meetings.
y ahí llegan personas de agencias, ¿cómo se llama? De construcción,
Right. So workers from agencies as well as other industries like construction will come to these meetings.
que los abusan,
They have abuses there. From
que
the
no les pagan
workplaces.
salarios,
They're not paid their wages.
y nosotros hacemos un plan
So we make a plan
para poder recuperar sus salarios
to reclaim those wages that were not paid to them.
y nosotros hacemos la acción directa.
And we'll do direct action.
Nosotros no vamos al departamento de labor
So,
primero.
It's not always going to the DOL first.
Para eso tenemos que organizarnos primero para poder ir a la acción directa.
So we have to organize ourselves first if we're going to do a direct action.
y hemos recuperado muchos salarios.
and we recovered a lot of wages that way.
Hemos recuperado salarios de hasta $3,000 o $4,000 por una sola persona.
Up to $3,000, $4,000 in some cases for just one person.
Y seguimos en la lucha y no vamos a dejar que nos sigan abusando.
And continue, continue fighting. We're not going to let them abuse us like that anymore.
Aquí hay una fotografía donde meten a personas en una que no es ni van ni nada, es un carro normal y meten más de 10 personas.
Right, so here's a picture of a van. I'll give a little bit of background to it. Most people are transported by van to the workplaces. Again, going back to Giancarlo's point about people not having licenses. People are forced to use the vans even though the law says if you have an alternative mode of transportation, you can get there. And a lot of times, again, going back to my experience too, they're built for 15 people, but they'll put in 18, 19, have you riding on the wheel cover, sometimes in the trunk. In this case, when they run out of vans, they send an SUV. And Alberto Hendete was pointing out that this is already full. There's maybe going to fill about 8, 9 people in there, which is, it's acting as a taxi, which is illegal in itself, in addition to having too many people in it, right? So there's always problems with unsafe vans and unsafe van drivers.
Y esto a veces como dice que no tenemos licencia.
Right, sometimes there's people, just because of not having a license.
Y lo hacemos porque queremos el trabajo.
So we do it because we want the job.
Pero eso es malo de subirse un carro así que no tenga un permiso para transportar gente.
And it's bad to be able to, or have to go into a van like that doesn't have the permission to transport people.
Es muy peligroso.
Dangerous.
Nosotros también luchamos contra la compañía que son muy grandes, que es Walmart, Macy's.
So there's part of a system to fight or struggle against some of these big companies such as Walmart or Macy's.
Yo les voy a explicar un poco del sistema de la trampa.
I'll explain a little bit about this. It's known as a cheating system. It's called like a cheating system, sistema de la trampa.
Sistema de la trampa empieza con las empresas grandes que son Walmart, Macy's, Target.
Okay. So as a system, it starts with big companies at the top, such as Walmart, Target, Macy's.
Ellos para recibir su producto
To get their products,
contratan a los warehouse
will contract or subcontract out to warehouses.
y lamentablemente en los warehouse hay condiciones muy inseguras,
And unfortunately, these warehouses have unsafe conditions.
pero ellos no lo ven porque ellos lo que necesitan nada más su producto y no les importa lo que pase en los
So
warehouse.
they don't see that in their eyes because all they care about is getting their products. So they're saying it's not them.
Y para que los warehouse puedan tener el producto ahí, ellos contratan a las agencias temporales.
And so that the warehouses can have their products moved, they hire out agencies.
Y las agencias pagan un salario mínimo
And the agencies will usually pay a minimum wage,
por un trabajo que es alrededor de 10 o 11 dólares.
right, for jobs that are usually like $10, $11 an hour or more.
Abusan de los trabajadores.
And in that way and other ways abuse workers.
Y lamentablemente, los que estamos hasta último de las agencias contratan a los trabajadores nosotros como inmigrantes.
Right, and unfortunately that's usually us that's at the bottom of the system, immigrant workers being contracted by temp agencies,
Y somos abusados.
and we're abused.
Porque nosotros para que Walmart tenga todo ese producto, nosotros tenemos que producirlo.
Right, so again, going through this whole system so that Walmart has stuff or other companies have stuff on their shelves, we're part of the system to make sure that we can produce it. and get that.
Empacando,
From packing,
haciendo limpieza.
cleaning,
Y esto es algo muy fuerte lo que está pasando aquí en
so it's
el área laboral de los warehouse.
a really heavy thing that's going on there. So, I just wanted to add something along the lines of what Alberto was saying. So again, with this system, a lot of times it's created that way to avoid responsibility so that you're passing the blame off to another party. Agencies are hired out. Everyone knows for the most part that people that work in agencies probably don't have the right documentation. But they do that so they don't have, the warehouse doesn't have to hire them. Again, the warehouse hires the agency, so they're not responsible for that. Walmart and third-party distribution centers will hire the warehouses, so they're not responsible for that as well. Each one's trying to, wipe their hands clean of anything that's going on in the system. So it's also a global phenomenon. I'm sure you might have seen the Bangladeshi fire, where 112 people died in a factory that was producing Walmart goods. So all along the system, from production in places like Bangladesh or Honduras to the ports where people are unpacking these products, or being driven in with trucks with a lot of diesel exhaust, etc., to the warehouses where members are unloading trucks, reloading trucks, and sending stuff out to distribution centers, ending up in stores where associates that work there are usually, again, making low-wage jobs. So these are usually some pretty big companies that are making hefty amounts of money, but yet all along their chain, people don't see the benefits of that. Just another picture here. I don't know if you can see it. This is just one case of one worker that was owed for transportation that he didn't use, and this is showing that the agency ended up paying it after we contacted them, plus 1 day of work. And as you can see, this is not isolated. This is just, I guess, one pay period or one area of one agency, and there's multiple problems here. Someone not being listed, someone not being paid the correct rate, someone not using the transportation, again, someone having an incorrect name. So there are unfortunately kind of endemic and repeated problems, right? So be it workers being exposed to unsafe conditions and not having training, to straight up robbery. So another case I'll just mention, now that they're all coming to my head, a company called eSmoke, which makes electronic cigarettes out of Lakewood. And workers there were consistently being paid overtime as a bonus rate, just at regular rate. So it was tens of thousands of dollars that they were not being paid. At the same time, workers were exposed to chemicals without knowing what they were working with. Even some that worked in the production area had to do quality control, meaning they would have to inhale them to make sure they tasted right. And these are people that didn't smoke and didn't want to smoke. But again, there's the fear and the need to do the job, and certain employers that are egregious, that's what they'll do.
Bueno, y muchas gracias y por habernos invitado para que nos escuchen nuestra historia.
Right, so thanks again for inviting us and hearing our stories.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and thank you, Lou. I would invite you to spend a few minutes with questions for Alberto and Lou, and then we'll go on to the next segment. Let me first ask, Alberto, are you able to work virtually full-time? Do you work every day?
¿Tú trabajas como full-time todos los días?
Sí, yo trabajo las 40 horas.
I myself can work 40 hours, yes.
And do you always get paid?
¿Siempre te pagan?
Afortunadamente, sí, no me ha pasado nada.
But fortunately, in my case, yes.
Okay, all right. Francis?
Can you describe what the living arrangements are like for people who are not documented?
Bueno, mis arreglos para poder vivir en este país bien es que tenga un permiso de trabajo,
Right, so to be able to live comfortably, you'll need a work permit.
una licencia, como dijo Giancarlo,
Like Giancarlo said, have a license,
tener seguro médico,
and like having health insurance.
y yo siento que para mí ya es vivir bien en este país.
That's to be able to live good. Creo que se enfoca más cómo viven las condiciones de casa, etcétera, cómo viven, qué es lo que hace la gente ahí.
Oh, bueno,
So
las condiciones que tenemos nosotros ahorita es muy deplorable,
talking about the living conditions in housing is not really good.
porque pagamos una renta muy alta
So we pay a very high rent,
y no nos alcanza el dinero que ganamos en el trabajo,
and the money we make at work is not enough to go towards the rent.
que es un salario mínimo.
That's it's a minimum wage. So in my experience too, there's basically what you would call stacking. So because everything is so expensive, you'll have multiple people living in rooms. The most extreme case is people rotating beds. Someone working one shift, sleeping in there, and then the other person working a different shift, sleeping in that bed, and working throughout. So in New Jersey is the second or first highest state. I don't know which one in terms of living costs and rent. And to be able, there's a legal service in New Jersey does, I guess, an index for what would be considered an adequate wage to be able to live and pay less than 30% of your income towards rent, and you need to be making about $13 an hour, right? Most people, again, do not make that at all, right? So that creates some of those conditions in the first place. In Lakewood, I guess more in particular, some pretty bad housing stock, and the Asbury Park Press did a very in-depth study of that. The conditions aren't always the best, and landlords are kind of irresponsible. Some of the payments are in cash to intermediaries again, so no one knows who the landlord is, where they live, what their phone number is, even though it's most stuff that we would normally have. So yeah, the conditions there are unsafe in terms of electricity, cables exposed, cockroaches, things like that.
I think that we often think of undocumented immigrants as being vulnerable people living in the shadows, and yet what you describe about New Labor is about people standing up with a great deal of courage and conviction, and certainly the dreamers as well. And I would like you to relate that to the worker center movement around the country, and a little bit about how the kinds of leadership methods that you've developed have been shared with other worker centers and have affected workers around the country.
Basically, as Michelle mentioned, there is kind of a worker center movement. Worker centers were basically formed in the absence of unions, where people could go, again, to have a space to confront issues that might happen in the workplace or in the community. So New Labor, we've been around since 2000, so we've been here for 13 years, and we have worked with Rutgers University to create a training curriculum that is participant-oriented and participant-based. So again, it's not just the person up in front of the room, but actually the content, people working together in small groups to solve real-life problems and get to a certain conclusion, working together in the groups to do that instead of just having someone up in front of the room. So we've developed this curriculum around workplace health and safety, and we've trained hundreds of workers to be trainers for other workers and other worker centers throughout the country as well. So again, it's a lot more empowering and moving to have someone who's an actual worker up in front of the room during the training, to have a qualified expert come in and do it. People can relate more easily to someone who's just like them, right, up in front of the room. So by putting people in those leadership positions, again, it's helping grow the organization, helping create a base that can be mobilized as well, right? It's not just relying on one person, one leader. In fact, it's creating multiple leaders. So again, with the training we've done it for a variety of industries, and we've done it for other worker centers as well. So it's not just us that's growing, but other worker centers as well. They're building their capacity too.
Thank you all. It is, and thank you especially to Lou and Alberto. Thank you very much for your stories. What I'd like to do now is tell you what we're going to do for the rest of the program and then ask you a question. I'm going to take maybe 10 minutes to go through the outline of the proposed Senate bill. And then we'll talk about possibilities for reform, this comprehensive immigration reform that both Giancarlo and Lou and Alberto have talked about. On your handout, that I hope everybody has, is a kind of sections with bullets on the elements of this huge, huge bill, 844-page bill. And it seeks to be a comprehensive bill applying to many, many different facets of the immigration problem, and it obviously is a compromise. I'll do this if you'll do that process among the 8 senators who negotiated this bill. And again, I'm going to, as quickly as I can, go through this. The number one and the biggest hammer in the bill is border security. The bill insists on much, much better border security than we've had before. The Republicans take the attitude that says, look, in 1986, undocumented people got amnesty, and then millions more came after that. This time, if we give legal status to undocumented people. I'm not going to call it amnesty because I don't think that's even close to the right word. But if we give them legal status, how can we be sure that millions of people won't come in? And the answer is to provide for a really amazing militarization of our border, far more than exists today. There is a requirement to build fences like we've never seen. There's a huge increase in the number of border agents. There's a requirement to have drones and radars and all kinds of technical equipment to police our borders, far more than we did after 9/11, and become a very, very militarized border. The goal is what they call 90% effectiveness within 5 years. With all this technical equipment, presumably you'll be able to count the number of people who try to sneak across the border without properly going through border stations. No, it is primarily for the Mexico side, but it is the Canadian border too. And it's like 90-10 or 85-15 in terms of resources to the southern border versus the northern border. And assuming we can count the number of people who try to cross the border, the requirement in the plan is that there's a 90% effectiveness rate, that Homeland Security catches and returns 9 out of every 10 people who seek to cross the border illegally. And if that 90% rate is not reached first within 5 years, then the plan kind of doubles up. And then within 10 years, then guess what? The currently undocumented people will not be able to get citizenship. So there's a trigger there that says, you know, you've got to build fences and you've got to patrol your borders far more than we have. Path to citizenship. Beginning 6 months after enactment of this bill, undocumented people may apply for a new kind of status called Registered Provisional Immigrant, or RPI, Registered Provisional Immigrant. You have to pay a $500 fine, and you have to show no criminal record and things like that. But you can apply and become an RPI. Once you're an RPI, you have legal status in this country. You can work, you can get a driver's license, you can travel internationally. If there's a death in your family back home, you can go back and visit the family. But you're legal, you have status in this country. There is a stay of removal once you make the application. Immigration and Customs Enforcement will not proceed to deport you. And if you're already in deportation proceedings or been recently deported, you can still apply for this provisional status. After 10 years as an RPI, you can apply for a green card. And after 3 years of a green card, you can apply for citizenship. The application for a green card will include a fine of another $500, and the application for citizenship will include a fine of $1,000. So cumulatively, there's a $2,000 fine. And a lot of other requirements about becoming a citizen. You have to show that you know English, you have to have a clean criminal record or almost clean criminal record. There are a few things that don't count. And a number of other requirements, pay your taxes and things like that. But you can apply for citizenship. If you are a dreamer, if you're in this deferred action childhood arrival, if you're like Giancarlo, you still apply for an RPI status. You're grandfathered in, I'm told. I thought you still had to apply. And after 5 years in that temporary status, you can apply for a green card. Assuming you meet all the requirements, clean criminal record and so forth, you can immediately apply for citizenship. So the dreamers do have a shorter route than people like Alberto would have. Agricultural workers also have a shorter route, but that doesn't apply so much here in Central and North Jersey. It does apply, of course, in South Jersey. But there is a shorter track also for agricultural workers. Giancarlo talked about, now switch over to the second side of the sheet. Giancarlo talked about the current backlog of people applying for immigrant status. There's a very complex, multi-part plan to get past that backlog. And the idea is to require that that current backlog be eliminated within 9 years. That's why the administration is correctly saying that the undocumented workers, quote, go to the back of the line. Because guess what? They have to wait 10 years to apply. They have 10 years in registered provisional immigrant status before they can apply for a green card. A green card, you know, that's what everybody wants. That's legal permanent resident. Once you get a green card, you're fine as long as you stay clean and so forth. But you know, you have the papers that everybody wants. And so the green card is hugely important. And then once you have a green card, you can apply for citizenship. There are a few interesting little changes in the family connections and in the details about the current backlog. One enlarges the category that the bill calls derivatives. What the heck does derivative mean? It's not a term of mathematics in this case. It's a term of family connections. If you are part of a direct family, spouse or minor children or parent, then you're a derivative of the person applying for the dreamer status or for the undocumented status, and you're included in the status of these people who are now in a backlog system waiting for their application. And basically, derivatives go in a package. If I get papers, then my wife gets papers, or my minor children get papers. So there's a much better tightening up of families being treated together, with some exceptions. Like the current law allows for an adult U.S. citizen to sponsor a sibling and bring that person to this country. That sibling connection would go away under this current law. So there's complications, but in many ways the family connection is strengthened. Note to Unitarian Universalists, same-sex partners are not included in that family status. It'd be interesting if the Supreme Court overturns the Defense of Marriage Act, whether that would still be true or not, I don't know. But under current law, same-sex partners would not be considered family members. There are some improvements. Oh, and then one more thing that I will quickly mention. There's a new merit-based system that has a point system in it that includes family connection and education and employment, a fairly complicated new system for visas in the future. As we're taking care of this current backlog, new visa applications, of course, will be made, and they will be based on this new merit-based system. So they're trying to deal with the backlog and build a whole new kind of system in order to determine whom to give a visa to. And these are all permanent visas. There's some improvements in the detention system. There's more review of detainee cases, more use of alternatives to incarceration, which is now officially part of the Obama administration program, but often overlooked. Lots of people are in these terrible, terrible detention centers that we would all call jails that don't need to be if they had, you know, ankle kind of bracelet or some kind of alternative to detention. There would be more alternatives to detention, and much more standards would be required for the detention centers. There's some improvements in the detention system, but as I think it was Giancarlo who spoke more about the detention system than Lou and Alberto did, but there are huge problems with our current detention system, and they are somewhat improved, not a lot. On employment issues, within 5 years, all employers must use a system called E-Verify. E-Verify exists today. It's got a ton of problems with it, like everything has to match. If you have one record that has a hyphen in your name and another record that has two separate names, guess what? You can't get that job because you are two different people. Same with a photograph, and same with all kinds of what they call biometric information. The E-Verify system has to be improved a lot if it's going to really work. It is now not successful in, I think everyone up here would say it's not successful now. But the requirement within 5 years is that E-Verify applies to every employer. I assume it applies to us if we have a day worker come to clean our house. Every employer, certainly every business that employs, like a gas station that's hiring an assistant or something. And RPI holders may legally work immediately, and they have actually some guarantees that they don't have now. They have to be paid a fair wage. They have to be given portability in their jobs, which is not always true now, so that if, you know, employer one doesn't pay them or doesn't give them a raise or whatever, now in many cases they are obliged to continue working for that employer. Well, it won't be true in the future. You're allowed to have job portability under this bill. High-skilled workers, which we're not talking too much about, but the number of visas for high-skilled workers will go up substantially, at least double, and the way I read the bill, probably almost triple, because there are alternatives to increase it from what is now 65,000 visas a year to 180,000 visas a year. But those are for the engineers and the college graduates and the people who now do get in, although not enough. I mean, the demand is higher than the number of visas right now. For lower skilled workers that now currently have basically no way of legally getting in the country unless you have a family connection. There is no legal path for immigration now for lower skilled people except family connections. There is a new visa system called a W visa, and Lou did mention this very briefly. In this bill, there's a whole new kind of visa. The numbers of visas to be allowed as W visas, lower skilled worker visas, is a complex formula to be developed based on labor market conditions. Again, there are a fair number of job protections with wage and hour laws applying, fair wages applying, portability of jobs. An employer who wants to hire a W worker, the employer has a ton of requirements. They have to register and get kind of a license to hire a W worker. And I'm not sure that a lot of employers would go through the hassle of doing it. But if they do it, they would be permitted to hire these W workers. The W visas are not intended for permanent immigrants. They are called temporary visas for 3 years. But you can renew it and renew it. And so assuming that the labor market condition continues to apply, W visa holders could presumably stay in this country and eventually get green cards. But that's not guaranteed or anything because it's a 3-year term and the labor market conditions will apply. For last little point I want, or not so little it applies, last important point I wanted to mention is the refugees and the asylum seekers. Right now, for reasons that are not clear, there's a 1-year deadline for applying for asylum. This bill would repeal that 1-year deadline, and it would allow people who are currently here saying that they're asylum seekers. I think of Indonesians in Highland Park, New Jersey, and start me on that topic, I'll divert off immigration reform. But several hundred Christian Indonesian refugees have been imprisoned and threatened with deportation. A number of them have been deported. They could now legally apply for asylum. And there are some efficiencies in the asylum seeking process. It would apply to the whole family so that if, you know, the wife gets asylum status, then the family can stay legally. And for the first time in U.S. law, stateless persons are included as asylum seekers. I wanted to give you that brief overview, and I'll tell you it's brief. I mean, I've packed a lot of different things into this two-page outline. I'm going to invite again Giancarlo and then Lou and Alberto to say anything they want to say about this proposal, which is on the whole good, but not perfect by any means. It's a compromise. To say anything they want to say, and then I'll throw it open to questions. Giancarlo, do you want to say anything about the proposal?
All right, so one thing I do want to clarify on, I guess, which that was a very, very good summary, and there are other summaries online as well, which you could find, like New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, they all have fairly good summaries as well that go a little bit more in depth, is that while you're in that RPI status, you're not eligible for any federal benefits.
That's true.
So you're not going to get your health care, your Social Security, or any of those benefits.
Unemployment.
Yeah, unemployment. Like I have my Social Security card now and I'm paying into Social Security, but I still don't get any of those benefits. So that's something that's going to keep continuing while you're in there. And this also doesn't take into account how long it'll actually take to apply, to process. So people can say 13 years as soon as it passes, but in reality, it's going to be a long time to process over 11 million applications. For deferred action, I still have friends who have been waiting an initial review for 7 to 8 months. So that's why in a company with that, which is a little bit not exactly immigration reform. In New Jersey, what he mentioned before was what we're trying to pass is something called in-state tuition equity for Dreamers. So as he mentioned before, I pay out-of-state tuition here at Rutgers. So for me at Rutgers, I pay over $2,700 per class out of pocket without financial aid or scholarships. What this bill would do if it passes, and this is just state legislature, we don't have to worry about Obama or the Congress or the House, is it would allow me to pay, and others like me in my situation, pay the in-state tuition rates. It's not a subsidy, they're not giving me money, it would just be allow me to put me on the same level.
You are a New Jerseyan after all.
Yeah, I mean, I've been here 17 years and Rutgers considers me to be an out-of-state. Honestly, we did the math, it would be cheaper for me to go to New York and pay out-of-state there than it would be for me to stay here in Rutgers. I would pay $24,000 plus per year here at Rutgers, versus the $12,000 I would be paying if I was attending New York colleges. So I don't know why I do it. I think it's because I genuinely like New Jersey, and I do like Rutgers. I don't know if there are any Rutgers alumni here or anything, but I don't know. I like Rutgers, and that's the bill we're trying to do. And if anyone is interested in helping us on that campaign, you can contact your local state legislature and helping us on that campaign. He could probably send out my contact information if anyone wants to call me or send me an email, and we could work on that together. Hopefully we're going to have it as a floor vote in the assembly up in Trenton in June, and that's our goal is. And then we'll be, Christy, your move.
Lou, anything about this current bill?
Well, probably not too much, but I would basically echo what Ted said over here, that it is a compromise, and it's a proposal. It's not even legislation, so you have to go through the whole process to make it into legislation as a law, and it's going to be marked up all along the way. So this is where it starts. It's not where it's going to end up. It will probably be even more compromises along the way. So in that sense, again, it's not really the best if there's going to be more compromises made to it. So again, going back to everyone's role here, be it letters, faxes, congressional visits, to make sure that the congressmen and congresspeople that need to be on the same page are on the same page. It's going to be very important. You saw what happened in the Senate in terms of gun control. Something that we thought might have been able to be possible wasn't, right? So we hope that that's not the case here. Focusing more on the worker side, again, echoing about E-Verify, it's a very inconsistent and broken system. So there's always going to be people that fall through the cracks, even if that system is there in place. So there's still probably going to be an informal market, whether we like it or not. That's never going to completely disappear. Now, again, I didn't see it in there, so I don't know if you actually know about once someone loses their job, how long they have to wait, or what's the minimum or maximum number of days that they have to wait until they get a new job. If there's previously under McCain-Kennedy in 2006, there was basically like a 45-day waiting period that they would have to find a new job, or else they would be kicked out of the system, basically. So that would be important to know, because that would go back to
In this current bill, one cannot be stay in legal status and be unemployed for more than 60 days.
Okay. So again, that goes back to the fear factor that it did. That is basically 2 months that someone needs to find a job, and in the economy the way it is, it's not always that easy to find a job. So again, even though people will have the status, there still might be a reluctance to speak out about the conditions of work. And going back to the cheating system, again, there's in Chicago and LA, there's other groups organizing there. People that have been fired for, retaliated against for speaking up are people that have documents, are citizens of this country. So again, it just shows you the kind of state that we're in. There's going to need to be a lot of organizing to confront that kind of stuff. Hello.
Sobre lo de la propuesta, para mí es algo, por lo menos ya hay algo que nos puede ayudar.
So, well, at the very least, it's something that can help us.
Es un proceso largo, pero vale la pena.
It's a long process, but it's worth the effort.
Y ellos están protegiendo la frontera.
And yeah, obviously they're securing the quarter and protecting the border.
Eso, para mí, bueno, yo pasé por ahí, pero está bien que sigan protegiendo porque hay mucha delincuencia allá en la frontera.
I mean, I went through there, but at the same time, I understand it needs to be protected because there's lots of delinquency going on at the border as it is.
Para mí es una propuesta muy buena porque yo sé que a largo tiempo podemos tener una residencia.
So, for me, it's a good proposal because long term, I can have a residency.
Y es algo que concuerda con lo que ellos quieren tener.
And it's based on what they want to have.
Como dice que pagar una multa.
So, yes, there's going to be paying the fines.
Aprender inglés, que tengo que hacerlo.
Learning English, I need to do that.
Porque eso es algo muy importante.
And that's something very important.
Pagar los taxes, que eso es algo que nos identifica también en este país.
And paying taxes, that also identifies us as part of this country too.
Y sobre todo para tener una mejor vida y un buen trabajo.
And above all, to have a better life and a good job.
Esto.
That's it.
So now I invite anyone to come up to the microphone still, because we're still recording, and ask any questions that you have. Doesn't have to be about this bill, or it could be about the current system generally. Yeah.
I'm wondering how many senators are going to step forward and say, here we go again. This is a bill that grants amnesty, and the proof of limiting illegal entry across our borders comes later. And I always assume if you build a taller fence, somebody creates a taller ladder. And that the East and West Coasts have all sorts of opportunities for illegals to come in. So, with the gun legislation having gone down, at least for the moment, and the recent issue in Boston, which is a red herring because it really isn't the same thing, but people are going to use that. I think there's probably a real fight ahead to get this legislation approved.
Let me make a first stab, and then I'd invite anybody else. There's no question that he's right, that there will be a real fight ahead. I actually think the bigger fight will be in the House of Representatives. The Republican senators have much more of a national view of Republican Party politics. Many of them want to be president someday. I think it's clear that it's much, much more difficult for a Republican to be elected to the White House under our current broken immigration system. Just the arithmetic of politics says that. And if we hang together, work through the amendment process, I'm actually fairly hopeful that a decent compromise can be enacted by the Senate. Much more difficult in the House, because in the House, with the shape of congressional districts, almost all the congressional districts of both parties are safe for those parties. And what an incumbent Republican representative fears more than a Democratic opponent is an even more right-wing Republican opponent. And so will they be willing, at least enough of them, 50 or whatever number of them, be willing to compromise enough? I think that'll be a much harder lift to demonstrate. I also think that supporters of fair immigration will need to stay active and working, producing more progressive kinds of proposed amendments so that the more conservative kinds of amendments get balanced out. Lou, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say basically exactly what you're saying as well. If you look historically at the immigration reform bills that have come out, the Senate has usually reached an agreement and has always broken down in the House of Representatives. Here in New Jersey, our senators will support it. With Menendez sponsoring, Lautenberg, whoever is in his place, they will support it. So it's more on a local level with the House of Representatives. With our New Brunswick office, you have Frank Pallone. He's always been a champion of immigration reform. He spoke at the rally on the 6th up in Jersey City. In Lakewood, it's a different story. That's Chris Smith. He's a Republican who supports refugee and family rights. He's Catholic in his religious views. So we thought there were certain things that we can move him on. We've met with his office on all the years that we were trying to get immigration reform, but he never moved. So will that mean that he's different now? We hope, and we can be hopeful, like you're saying.
Maybe with Smith.
Yeah, that it could happen. So it's going to be a long process.
Going back to the tax issue, you said a lot of people don't understand and think that undocumented workers don't pay taxes. And so if you don't have a Social Security number, how is it that you pay? How does that work? Because I don't know either.
All right, so no, that's a good question. There's a big myth about undocumented people not being able to pay taxes or not paying taxes. So what the IRS actually does is they have something called an ITIN, a tax identification number, that they will give out to whoever applies for it, regardless of immigration status, and you can use that to pay your taxes. So with that, I've been paying my taxes, but you don't get any of the benefits from it. So you can't pay your taxes without a Social Security number.
So when you get a job,
The ITIN doesn't give you work authorization. It just allows you to pay taxes on some other things that you may be paying for, like say maybe your home mortgage or others income that you may have.
okay, I'm still not understanding if you're undocumented.
Well, let me do at least a part of an answer, but I really want to listen to them mostly. First, huge impact on taxes comes from taxes other than the income tax.
Okay.
If Giancarlo gets a check, a paid check rather than paid in cash, his employer is obliged to deduct the Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes. I'm quite sure, with a tax ID number or not, with a Social Security number or not, he's paying into Social Security and Medicare, but he has no chance under current law of ever getting any kind of benefit. Property taxes, if he's paying rent, the landlord is collecting the rent to cover the property taxes. Sales taxes, obviously, he's paying with a transaction at the spot.
Right.
Many, many taxes get paid by people in no matter what their work status and legal status might be. So if you just focus on income tax, you can answer one thing.
Right, that's what I'm asking. 'Cause
But
I
the
knew
income
others.
tax doesn't apply to millions of American people. Because of low income or whatever the cause, they're not paying income tax either. The income tax is a middle class and above kind of tax. Lou, do you want to add to that?
Not too much. I think you guys covered it, but I would just, it's just another way for the government to collect revenue, so that's why they do it in the first place, and it's a way people can show that they're here, right?
I just didn't understand how, if you don't have a Social Security number, how they can get your income taxes that way, and I understand it. I didn't know that if you had to file for an EIN number.
ITIN.
So but he doesn't, only you?
Oh, I don't
If
know
he
what
wants-
his status.
Right.
I don't
Si
know.
tú quieres pagar los taxes, tú vas por el PIN number. Sí, el ITIN.
Yo tuve que sacar un ITIN number,
So I had to go get the ITIN number,
como yo soy trabajador,
as I'm a worker.
yo no genero mucho al año,
I don't generate that much in a year,
pero tampoco me regresan mucho porque yo no soy legal aquí en este país, solamente tengo el ITIN number.
right? But as I'm not legal here in this country, I have that as something to at least show that I'm here.
Pero para mí es muy importante pagar los taxes porque uno contribuye con el país.
So it's very important to pay taxes, show you're contributing to the country,
Y es algo que uno tiene que pagar porque en el país uno también lo hace.
right? ¿Cómo es?
Es lo que uno tiene que pagar porque en el país de uno también tiene que pagar los impuestos.
Right, just like in
Tax.
your home country, you pay taxes too, so we got to pay them here.
This one. I hope this question's not too personal, but what made Alberto want to come here? I mean, what were the employment opportunities or lifestyles that in Mexico?
Sí, no espero que sea tan personal, pero ¿qué fue la motivación de venir aquí? ¿Cómo era la condición allá en términos de empleo, estilo de vida?
Bueno, pues yo vine a este país porque mi estilo de vida no era muy bueno.
I came to this country because my my lifestyle wasn't that good back in Mexico.
Yo tengo mi mamá, mi hermana y mi abuelita, que ellos vivían en una condición no muy buena.
I had my mom, my sister, and my grandma that lived in not the best conditions.
Y yo vine también porque mi papá también hizo un documentado y mi hermano también.
I came here because my father tenía el documento.
No, soy indocumentado.
Right, because my dad was here, but he also doesn't have documents either.
Y para mí ha sido algo muy bueno porque Estados Unidos me ha dado muchas oportunidades.
And it's been good because the U.S. has given me lots of opportunities.
Mi familia ya vive no muy como yo quisiera, una vida muy buena, pero ya no una vida lamentable que tenía antes.
I can't say that we're necessarily living the best, but I can also say we're not living the way we were before, so it's better than that.
Con la ayuda que yo les he dado, han vivido bien, no mucho, pero lo poco que yo gano lo reparto para poder vivir bien.
So the little that I make, I try to share it with everyone, so I can live well and they can too.
Y pues yo estoy agradecido y voy a seguir luchando para los documentos que quiero tener.
And I'm thankful. I'm going to keep fighting for the documents I think I should have.
Y muchas gracias por esa pregunta, muy buena la
And
pregunta.
thanks for that question. It was a good one.
Are there other questions?
On this form, under Path to Citizenship, I was struck by the last requirement, which was make above poverty level earnings. And with the minimum wage the way it is, what level of skilled worker is this portion directed towards?
The language of the proposed bill is complex, but the idea is that the government doesn't want to complete the citizenship process with people who then will collect welfare, who then will, have an impact on what the conservatives would say is a giveaway anyway. And so therefore there is a requirement to have 100% of the poverty limit, and I think under some conditions 125% of the poverty limit as a documented income. Lou, do you want to expand or discuss that?
Well, I mean, that's a very important point that you're raising, considering the current state. If people, again, going back to the temp agencies and warehouses, people there are making minimum wage, $7.25 per hour, yet when they're taking these van transportation, they're forced to pay basically $8 a day. So oftentimes they'll end up making less than minimum wage, right? And even at minimum wage, you're probably not even necessarily qualifying for poverty level, depending on who's in your family. So that's very important to mention, but yes, there's the politics behind it also.
The politics is, we don't want you to be a citizen if we're going to have to pay for your welfare. Kind of attitude.
So is this looking for, say, someone who's going to become a nurse or an assistant rather than a farm worker?
Well, the farm workers are treated a little differently because everybody across the political spectrum realizes that they need cheap labor to pick fruits and vegetables in our country. So I'm going to treat your exact example of farm workers and set that aside. But there is definitely a limitation, a difficulty with this bill in saying you have a path to citizenship, but if you earn minimum wage and have a family to support with dependents, you're still going to be classified under the poverty level. And if you know anything about poverty level issues, you know, the official poverty level, if you're $1 above the official poverty level, you're still poor as heck. I mean, you really, really are. The poverty level ought to be a lot higher. The calculation ought to be a lot higher than it is for any kind of decent living. But they have what they have, and the attitude is, I think Lou said it right, it's just politics to say that's not the kind of citizen that is going to be acceptable unless you have enough of an income that you won't be a drain on the budget.
Well, then on the reverse side, and I guess this is where I saw the conflict or heard the conflict, the W visa category. Eventually, someone said you could seek citizenship at some point.
Yes, you can. If you're here long enough and have a clean record and so forth, you can apply for a green card.
But these are, the bullet says category for lower skilled workers. So they're going to be making even less than the ones on path to citizenship.
Well, path to citizenship is that's not economically based. I mean, anyone who's here currently as an undocumented person, whether they originally came with let's say a student visa and then didn't go home when the student visa expired, or came across the border from Mexico as Alberto did, or whatever it might be, the path to citizenship section talks about whoever you are here now undocumented, regardless of your economic status. This new W visa category is designed officially as a temporary worker, and I improvised or extemporized by saying, since you can renew it and renew it and renew it, it may or may not be temporary. And you can eventually apply for a legal permanent resident, the green card. But if you do that, you have to show decent wages.
Okay.
And, one quick comment on the poverty thing. I don't know, since obviously you guys can tell I like New Jersey, so there's a referendum going up during this fall about minimum wage. Essentially, people will be able to vote to give themselves a raise. And this will be great because if this passes, we won't have to fight this battle again. It'll be tied to living standards here in New Jersey. It'll rise according to it or drop according to it. So I think that's great to keep in mind for when you guys go vote and you see a referendum on the ballot. And, you know, Christie happened to veto it last year even though it passed the legislature. So
That's why it's there.
Yeah, that's why it's there. So yeah, I just wanted to pitch that a little bit. That'll help out all New Jersey communities, not just the undocumented, because we have like hundreds of thousands making minimum wage here in New Jersey.
This is not a question, but just a comment on the last point. The minimum wage rate in this country is $7.25
In New Jersey.
in New Jersey.
And federal, I think,
And federal, $7.25. If you were working 40 hours a week, that would be about slightly less than $300 a week. If you work for 52 weeks, no vacation, nothing, that amounts to about $15,500 or so. That's exactly the poverty line level. So if you're going to qualify on that basis, you better have a job 100% of the time, 100% of the weeks.
Debate is just starting on this bill. I will again say that those of us who believe strongly in a more humanitarian, a more humane and fair immigration system need to stay at the alert, because certainly, quote, the other side will stay at the alert. Thank you very, very much for coming. Thanks especially to Giancarlo and Alberto and Lou for their expertise. I've learned a lot. Thank you very, very much.